Have a seat, sir. So on behalf of NALSAR, I'd like to welcome Dr. Colin Gonsalves. So he's come here at the initiative of one of our student groups, the Nyaya Forum, which is a very newly established group, and this is the second talk that they have organized for us. So thank you to them for taking the initiative and contacting Dr. Gonsalves. So once again, we'll continue with the practice of very short introductions. Dr. Colin Gonsalves is known as amongst the best human rights lawyers in India at the moment. He's been involved with numerous public interest litigation cases and has been involved in some significant orders, especially those involving the provision of food security, the question of police reforms, amongst many other fields. So without any further ado, I will hand over the floor to him and request him to speak about his experiences with public interest litigation and with litigating rights-based questions in his own career. Over to you, sir.
Good morning to you all, and thank you for the invitation, Dr. Mustafa, and the students. Thank you very much for the invitation that brings me to NALSAR. I've come here now after many, many years. I came when KG Kannabaran was alive and doing a lot of work in Andhra Pradesh, and when Balagopal was alive. Two names I think many of you may not be familiar with. And I think most of you may not have met either Kannabaran or Balagopal. But there was a time, and I think even today Hyderabad or Andhra, Telangana is still alive. But there was a time when the human rights movement here was very, very dynamic. And from the law point of view, there was KG Kannabaran, who was a giant of a lawyer in criminal law, and who was my godfather in many ways. Not a godfather in terms of pushing me up the career path, but a godfather in terms of the learning of criminal law. And whenever I had trouble in the Supreme Court in any case, I would get out of the court and call Kanna, as we called him, and he would guide me on the phone as to what line to take. Balagopal, of course, was much younger. He died very young of some complication in the stomach, a cyst in the stomach. And he was an extraordinary lawyer who went every weekend to tribal areas. So Friday evening, he'd pack his bags and go to tribal areas where he would go to persons who had legal problems, and you'd see him noting down the facts of the case, and then he'd come back on Monday morning and argue his briefs in the court. So I did many cases for Balagopal from the Andhra Pradesh High Court and the Supreme Court. And it was such a strange and artistic blend of activism and law. And there's generally a feeling that if you're a good activist and you're spending all your time in the rural areas and you're spending your time in agitations and in, protests and so on, you're obviously taking away from your time in the courts, you're obviously taking away from preparation time and so on. So you would expect, or people would think in normal terms, that you would expect that the drafts would be pretty shabby. But Balagopal was extraordinary in the sense that he would combine his activism and his learning with a great deal of precision in the drafting of his petitions. In fact, the converse is the truth. Namely, that if you interact with people, if you manage to absorb from them some of their spirit of resistance and rebellion, if you are willing to live among people, if you're willing to learn from people, it informs your cases, your drafting, your pleading, your speech, your tongue, the sharpness of your delivery, the ability to think on your feet, the ability to answer questions of the court with a certain degree of spontaneity. So a judge feels this is not a practiced answer. This is not a rehearsed answer. But this is an answer which the advocate feels from his heart that this is the answer to be given. So your interaction with people, and Balagopal had that, his interaction with people was so intensive. And he absorbed so much of the spiritual energy of his clients. I think he internalized the suffering of the people of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana He internalized that suffering. He could see the poverty-stricken, economy in which they lived, how they faced the terror of the police. He could internalize that, and so he was very, very good. If you like, he took the drafting of the people in a very different way, not from verbal articulation. He took instructions from the people and his clients in terms of their energy and the energy field around them, which transmitted to him. And his drafting was very precise, and he was a very good lawyer. And he died at a very young age. How old was he? 50-something, 58. And so we lost two of our stalwarts here, and I lost my connection with Telangana and Andhra quite a bit. I'm happy to come because I want to warn you of certain things and tell you of certain things that you will face in the years to come. Your parents lived in a period of general economic calm, the period of globalization where things were generally very good. They got decent jobs, they had decent salaries. There was a future for middle class, upper middle class people, let us say. Not a future for the poor. The future for the poor never existed in this country. But there was a certain degree of stability in upper middle class consciousness and lives. That, well, we'll get a job, we'll have some savings, we'll buy a car, we'll buy a house, we'll save for our future, and so on and so forth. But I must tell you that the times are changing very much. And you who are in your 20s may not have that kind of stability and financial income and placidness in your life that the earlier generation went through. And so you must think now in your 20s as to what things will be like when you are 30, 40, 50, 60. And what will India be like for you and your children and their children? And you must invest now for a future that is very uncertain. This country, notwithstanding anything anybody may tell you, is going downhill. And when you practice in the Supreme Court, you get to see the insides working of the economy, the political situation. You get to see some things. And it is perhaps not as rosy as is made out to you. And it is perhaps very hazardous to go by what is told to you on television or even the newspapers. In the last 10 years, all the newspapers have been bought by corporate houses. In the last 10 years, all the channels have been bought by corporate houses. The last victim was CNN IBN, where Mukesh Ambani bought the entire channel, sacked Rajdeep Sardesai, sacked Sagarika Ghosh, sacked Karan Thapar, and 800 journalists with him, right across the country. Why? Because they were independent journalists who wanted to report the news and the truth as it appeared to them. And they didn't want to be dictated by a policy, by a media policy that supported a particular political party. So now you have to be very careful, and you as young students who go onto the internet and do a lot of, searching for the truth, and you can find a bit of the truth on the internet as well. You are not necessarily bound by what you read in the newspapers and on television. You must try and decipher for yourselves, find out for yourselves what the real situation is. We are seeing in the Supreme Court today the case on the banks, that the Indian banks are on the throes of a very deep and fundamental crisis, where Prime Minister after Prime Minister and Finance Minister after Finance Minister have looted the public sector banks. You hear only of the Kingfisher case. But now the court is deciding whether the names of all the defaulters should also come in the public domain. And all the biggest names in industry you find have taken money from the banks, siphoned it away, got money again, siphoned it away, and the banks are on the brink of a very big crisis. Anyway, The economy and politics is in very deep crisis, and you must now think about, open your eyes to the reality of India and see India as it really is. India is going through one of the largest migrations in modern history, with millions of people leaving the rural areas and coming to the cities. Millions. The agricultural crisis, if Sainath were here, he would tell you, and you must call him here one day perhaps, is of unimaginable proportions. And our politicians say they want an India where in maybe 20 years' time, 30% of people will remain in the rural areas and the rest would come to the cities. And the migration is on a very large scale, coming first to the small towns and then to the cities of India. And for the first time in the census, the growth of the urban centers and the semi-urban centers is outpacing the growth of population in the rural areas. So my dear friends, just keep your eyes open. Look around you and prepare for a world which is going to be very turbulent. Very turbulent. And prepare, as young lawyers, young law students, prepare for a world where you will be stretched to the maximum possible extent, and you will face challenges that your earlier generation never faced. And you'll be called upon to take different tasks, take to different paths, choose different ways of working, use law in imaginative ways, and look for careers in areas that you never thought possible. I was an engineer. I did my engineering in IIT Bombay, 70-75. And as I walked along your campus, it reminded me very much of IIT Bombay. It's a very beautiful and peaceful campus. It's a nice place for young people to grow up. It gives you peace of mind and solitude. It gave me, I was a very troubled young man. It gave me a lot of time and peace so that my mind could sort of sort itself out as to the direction in which I wanted to go. My parents were middle class, lower middle class. And I got in thinking I'll get a degree in engineering and I'll get a job and so on. IIT has a beautiful campus of 750 acres and 2 lakes. But I was troubled in the years when I was in IIT. And I must say, I enjoy speaking always to troubled young people. If you are settled already in what you want to do, and if you are settled in what where you want to go, then there's very little that I say that will be of interest to you. But I'm a specialist in dealing with troubled people because I was a very troubled person myself. And I've learned to break many, many rules of what should be done, what should not be done. You must always have a senior, etc., etc., etc. And I've always charted a very individualistic and path of my own, which I felt was appropriate for me. And so when young lawyers say, how should I begin my arguments? Should I say it like this and should I say it like that? And when young lawyers try and imitate senior lawyers as to how they should speak and talk to the judge and so on. And I always say you have to build it from inside. You must build a kind of way of delivery and communication which is your own. And imitating a senior lawyer is the worst thing that you can possibly do. Anyway, I spent my 5 years in IIT swimming in the lake rather than attending classes. Although I would not advise young students to go and swim in the lake here. And it was a tumultuous period. A sort of period which you are getting into yourselves. The emergency. The Bihar movement, Jai Prakash Narayan's movement. The railway strike, where colleges sent young people, including IIT Bombay, young people from my batch, went and pretended to be driving the trains of Bombay to break the railway strike. My batchmates, that 72, 73, 74 batch. They tried to break the strike. Government used them to break the strike, if you like. And there were photographs in the Times of India showing, young IIT students helping to drive the trains and so on. Utter nonsense, of course, but propaganda. And of course, the famous textile strike that took place after that. In the railway strike, Indira Gandhi gave the call for the families of the railway workers to be thrown out of their quarters at midnight. So the police came and took all their belongings and threw them on the pavement, and we had hundreds of families of railway workers sitting on the pavement with their houses locked. And many IIT students went there to try and help the families, get back their possessions and so on. So it was a tumultuous period, and in that tumultuous period, you will feel a lot of emotions. Many of you may not feel any emotions at all because globalization has taught us to be very insulated from society, very individualistic. Why should I care what happens to railway workers or textile workers and so on? And your parents will tell you, like my parents told me, look after yourself. It's not your job to look after other people or worry about other people. Your parents will tell you. My parents were middle-class people who spent all their money educating me, and in those days it was 300 rupees a month in IIT Bombay, and 300 rupees a month was something my father found very difficult to put together, let me tell you. So the greatest impediment to growth, the greatest impediment to you transforming yourself into a vibrant human being will come from those closest to you. And if you're a woman, you've had it. Because you've got to get married. You've got to keep your reputation, you've got to do this, you've got to worry about your sisters and brothers getting married and all that kind of stuff. So the greatest envelope of darkness, if you like, or the greatest envelope of conservatism will come from those closest to you who will ask you to maintain the status quo, carry on in life, use your contacts. We know this person, we know that person, get good jobs, marry, have a house, have a car, have children, and live happily ever after. But unfortunately, the human being has a human soul, and the human soul is a very relentless creature. You can't confine it, you can't restrict it. It moves in various mysterious ways. And the human soul basically seeks perfection and goodness, seeks justice, seeks equality, hates discrimination, hates violence. And so from time to time, notwithstanding your education and your family, your little human soul will murmur protests. That is the quintessential absolute in every human being. It'll murmur a protest. And at times, depending on the situation, like in my times when I was in the midst of all these movements and Jai Prakash's movement and so on, and then we were joining Marxist study circles and we were learning, about Trotsky and so on. I can see some of you smiling about Marxist study circles, but it was the most wonderful time of my life, really. And if that relentlessness starts in your soul, it's a sign of being alive, very alive. Because if you're not alive in your 20s, you will never be alive in your 30s, 40s, 50s. You will die young. Like all my friends in my college, I tell you, all of them in IIT Bombay, the 70-75 batch was the miracle batch, so to speak. So all of them went abroad. They went to Berkeley, Silicon Valley, and so on. And overnight, they became multimillionaires. Huge profits, huge, all kinds of innovative things. And when I go back and I try to raise some money for human rights and so on, I realize that their spirit died very young. They did very well for themselves, but their spirit died very young. And not only do they not give me money for the work that I do, but they also lecture me and give me a stern lecture on why it is that I, should not do the things that I do, and why do I oppose certain persons, who, and Why is it that I keep on relentlessly arguing for human rights in India, where, according to them, human rights have come? With the elections, there's no need to do anything more anyway. You have somebody now who's going to give you everything. He's going to give you jobs, money, he'll give you dignity, he'll give you safety, he'll give you security, he'll keep the terrorists at bay. Colin, time for you to retire. So I realized, that I had a hope that they were my classmates, they were my roommates, and we did many naughty things together and so on. So I thought maybe there's a little bit of naughtiness still remaining, and I realized that very early, maybe in their, as soon as they got out of IIT, they let their conscience die. Not necessary, you can make money and still have a conscience and do good things, But they decided, and it sort of died. So I was in IIT and I did a lot of this stuff. And I became an engineer. And by the time I was out, my conscience was raging. I couldn't keep it under control. It was just in search of the truth. I managed to get through IIT. I just managed to get through IIT. 50%, I think, was the passing mark. I never went back because it was a very restless period for me. And so when they gave me the Distinguished Alumnus Award about 4 or 5 years ago, and I went back to IIT after maybe 2 or 3 decades, the dean of the college introduces me. So we are all sitting on the dais, ex-alumni, and that gentleman is a secretary, petroleum, this gentleman is some businessman, distinguished people. And there's Mr. Colin Gonsalves. So he introduces me saying, and now I must tell you about Mr. Colin Gonsalves, who, had you seen him when he was in IIT, you wouldn't believe that he would win any award. What a fine way of giving me an award, the Distinguished Alumnus Award. And then I left IIT and I joined the slum resistance movement in Bombay, which had a lack of slum dwellers, and we fought against evictions. And we would fight with the police, we would get arrested, we would get beaten up by the police, we'd get put into jail. And my father, who was having a very difficult time, would read in the newspapers that this gentleman, Mr. Colin Gonsalves, wearing a white kurta pajama, was caught fighting with the police and he was sent to jail. And so he'd ask me the next day, what's this all about? And I said, no, Dad, it was, just got into some, and pass it off. And I must say, my dad actually didn't say anything after that. I mean, he must have felt, hey, I educated my son and he's got no money. I remember it was something like a few hundred rupees a month was our salary in that organization. And then I got married, and then I got married to an activist, and then I joined the Datta Samant's movement, a very militant trade unionist who had 1 million people in his union. And those were the finest days of my life, really. He paid me a pittance of something like, I think, 500 rupees a month. And I worked with him for 4 years with a B.Tech degree. And it was the finest years of my life because I worked with laborers right through the length and breadth of Bombay. I got to meet them, I got to live with them. I lived in a housing, in a slum kind of colony where the textile workers used to live. And it was very hard to live on 500 rupees a month. My B.Tech degree was now worthless. But I managed to see the world through the eyes of working class people. I went through hundreds of strikes. I would speak at lockouts, I would speak, at factory gates. I learned the art of speaking to workers. I learned the art of learning from workers. And I lived in the colony where they lived. I was having a ball, basically. Most middle class people would have said, oh, I'm going through a terrible time. I was having a ball. And my sisters were very rich. They had married into industrial families and so on. So they would see me in tattered jeans and so on, going by bus, not able to pay auto fares and so on. And I learned labor law through the eyes of workers, through the teaching of workers. I didn't realize what path I was on. I just went where the wind blew. And they taught me. I would go to I've been to about 100 and 150, maybe 200 industrial establishments in Bombay. I have seen every big factory. I have defended the workers in all those factories. I defended them in their department inquiries. I defended them in court. And I started my practice of law, let me tell you, by wearing a black coat and a black tie and pretending I was a lawyer. Breaking the law was something that came to me very easily. And I would tell you as young students that in your youth, you must learn when and where to break the law. There are too many laws, there are too many stifling regulations, there are too many things, not to do this, not to do that, don't do this, don't do that. You must learn when and where to hold that a law is redundant and ridiculous and break the law and go ahead freely. Like Gandhi did, I always actually justify my actions by reference to Gandhi. Because the Salt March broke a law, it broke a colonial law saying that you can't manufacture salt. So in gatherings, official gatherings, so to speak, I can refer to Gandhi and draw strength from that instance of rebellion to say that young people everywhere should learn to do that. And I learned labor law very well. Practiced in the labor courts for many years. Practiced in the High Court, Bombay High Court for many years. Refined then my understanding of labor law. Slowly branched out into criminal law and other branches of law. And then shifted to Delhi in 2000 and I'm now practicing in the Supreme Court in Delhi for the last 16 years. I've seen a little bit of the functioning of the judicial system. The internal unrest in this country, if it grows as I say it does, it will. Maybe I'll be totally wrong and maybe there'll be a total system of peace and tranquility and economic growth and so on. I don't think so. I think this is going to be a very turbulent period for India economically and politically. You can't run this country on hate. You cannot run this country on fear. You cannot run this party without collective, participatory, transparent, collective rule. You cannot run it on the basis of dictatorship. You may get a popular vote. You may be able to promise people the stars in the sky. But you cannot run this country without the goodwill, the love, affection, and the participation of the people of India. You cannot run it on morality that belonged to a period that is long past gone. You cannot run this country with people deriding women, deriding Dalits, speaking against Muslims. You cannot run this country without unity of its people. You cannot. You can divide a people, you can rule a people, but you cannot do it for a very long time. And if you ask me what is the clearest indicator of whether a country is going up or down, are we together as a nation? Are we together, all the people of India, are we together? Are we marching together? Do we have solidarity? Do we have comradeship? Do we have friendship? And if we don't, take it as a very troubling feature for our future. Internationally, we are seeing things today that we never saw before. Unemployment in Italy is 40%, 50%. Spain, France. Unemployment has hit the roof. There are people, young students in Europe like yourselves, who are sitting at home unemployed. Europe never saw unemployment. Till the last maybe 5 years, until the last, for the last 30, 40 years, Italy never saw unemployment. France, Spain, Greece. And to have young people sitting at home moving into their parents' houses once again is an unthinkable catastrophe. in their 30s and 40s. They would leave home when they were 18 and 19. Now in their 30s, they are back with their parents again because they're unemployed. The whole system, if you like, of capitalism is going through some kind of a reorganization. The old system cannot hold, cannot continue. The bankers, the banking system, exploitation, super profits, rich getting richer, poor getting poorer cannot sustain. And so for the first time in the center of Europe, you see young students coming on the street with Molotov cocktails and firing at them at the police, fighting with the police, getting arrested and so on. It's an unthinkable environment in Europe. So Europe and India and the rest of the world, something fundamental is happening to the lives of young people. Break out of the bubble and think for yourself. And I want to help you today in a little way by telling you of how, as young lawyers, you don't necessarily have to get into the rut that lawyers often do, or law students often get into. You feel a sense of helplessness. Perhaps the only opportunity available to me is to get into a corporate house, join a law firm, join a senior. These are viable options. But for those of you who want to be a little bit more daring, engage with people, and evolve a practice of your own, which is a bit different, there are many ways forward for you. And when I say different, I don't mean you're in a kind of a minority kind of a setting where, you know, this is mainstream and this is what you do. Human rights and human rights litigation is mainstream. I learned that, and I learned from my practice. Human rights and human rights litigation has the dominant clients. The area of cases where you can generate huge amounts of work is in human rights. And can you live a decent life by doing human rights litigation? Yes, you can. No human rights lawyer dies of starvation in this country. Yes, of course, you can't get a BMW if that's what your aspirations are, but you can lead a modest and decent life as a human rights lawyer. There are millions of clients to whom normal lawyers can't get access. Many of them are poor, they can't poor, but many of them are capable of paying, so you can live a decent life financially. And there's huge amount of work to be done. Now let me give you some of the cases that we're doing. Let me give you some of the examples of these cases. You are able to do litigation in India because the Indian litigation system is very different from the rest of the world. That you've studied, I suppose, in class, or you will study. If you're in your first and second year, I suppose you will study it by the time you graduate. It's the most extraordinary system of public interest law in the world. You go to Harvard and tell them about your system of public interest law, and the Harvard professors who are supposed to be leaders in the world are quite amazed at what people do in India. You go to SOAS or you go to any university in Europe and tell them about the type of cases that you've done, and they're really flabbergasted. Because the whole of Europe and America, they are not constitutional law systems, right? They're statutory law systems, broadly, and common law systems. They don't teach you collective rights as opposed to individual rights. They don't teach you that locus standi, anybody can go to a court in a public interest litigation, anybody. A law student can take some of the most profound cases to the High Court and Supreme Court and get fantastic orders. You can't think of that in America or Europe. You can't even believe that you can do that. Individual rights in America. Locus standi in America, you must say, I represent A, B, C, D, E, and get their vakalatnamas, so to speak. But our right to food case was 350 million people, benefits for 350 million people without a single vakalatnama. Because you're representing in good faith, you're representing the hungry and the starvation level people in this country. So Europe and America are systems where if you were to go to, I would say don't even think of any, just join the mainstream. There's very little work available outside the mainstream in these countries. You have to get into the rut, so to speak. And those countries and those systems are resistant to change. And that's why you've seen American Supreme Court go from what it was to what it is today. You can see jurisprudence in America decline from what it was in the 70s and 80s on human rights to the pitiable state into which it has fallen today. Who is the center of world jurisprudence? If I were to ask you that question, what would you answer? Where is the center of world jurisprudence on human rights? On public interest law? Would anybody answer? India. India is the center of world jurisprudence on human rights. If you want to look a bit outside, you'll say South Africa is the center of jurisprudence. If you want to look still further in South America, Colombia and its tutela system is the center of world jurisprudence. You go to the countries of South America and see the fascinating things that they are doing in the Inter-American Commission and the Inter-American Court. Fascinating things that they are doing on constitutional law remedies. Go to tiny little Nepal and see the wonderful judgments coming out of Nepal, including the judgment on marital rape. Have any of you seen the judgment on marital rape from Nepal? Saying you can't have an exception to rape like marital rape. You can't say if, the husband rapes the wife, that because he's married, there's no, he's immune from prosecution. And in a 4-page judgment, the Supreme Court quashed the exception to rape and said marital rape is rape. Tiny little Nepal. Pakistan and suo motu public interest law. Hundreds of cases, sometimes against the military regime and so on. The judges of Pakistan are standing firm. And the lawyers of Pakistan are standing firm. You heard about the magnificent movement that they had, right? To bring back the Chief Justice and reinstate him as the Chief Justice of the court. So exciting things are happening in our part of the world, exciting things, but the Indian students are still not aware of the marvelous transformations that are taking place. And so the center of the world for human rights shifted from what was perceived of as the center, which was the USA, shifted to India. Then maybe there are offshoots in different other parts of the world and we do wonderful work. Why? Because locus standi was broadened to allow anyone to do cases. Why? Because our court said, we will not allow financial inability as an excuse. People are poor. My Lord, we have no money. We have no money to feed the people of India. We will not allow financial inability as an excuse, which is there in America even today, there in Europe even today. If a poor person comes to the court, we'll not tell the poor person, 100 kinds of technicalities. We'll not tell the poor person, listen, go and collect information and prove to us. Plaintiff proves, right? He who comes to the court must prove. Plaintiff proves. We can't say to a person, prove your case, give me your documentation, where are your photographs, where are your studies, where are your annexures. We won't say that. The court will take on the burden of doing the collection of information through commissioners and otherwise. Radical transformation in our country of which we should be proud. And which ought to be transmitted to young people so that you go out into the world, even today as second-year students and third-year students or first-year students. Go out into the world today and do these cases. And I always advise young students, take up your public interest cases when you are in college. Go to the court, stand before the court party in person and tell the judge. Go to the Supreme Court and tell the judge. Go bravely and tell the judge, sir, I'm a first-year law student at NALSAR. My Lord, I'm a second-year law student at NALSAR. I went to Mehboob Nagar, like I went recently. I went to Mehboob Nagar and I surveyed the villages and I found malnutrition among its people. I found a starvation death in Mehboob Nagar. And sir, these are my findings, and sir, this is what I want from this court. And I can tell you, if you tell a Supreme Court judge or a High Court judge that you're a student from NALSAR, and that you've done studies yourself, and not a newspaper report-based petition, but if you've actually gone to the area and seen the situation of people, and you do a writ petition, you might get a very fine order. So you must have confidence in yourself. You must have courage. As young people, you must have courage. No timidity allowed. No tentativeness allowed. You must have courage. And you can achieve anything. You can achieve anything that the world is out there really for you to practice and to do things. And I want to tell you a few things that we did. We started with right to food when I came to the Supreme Court in 2000, and I moved from the High Court here. We started the right to food case, and I'll give you that in a short while. We went to a village in Rajasthan. We were taken there by some activist friends. And in that village we found hut after hut after hut, home after home, without a single edible item. Now you know your homes. You go home, you open your fridge, you make a sandwich, you have a Coke. Home after home, and that's the situation today in large parts of India. Not a single edible item, not a speck of, not a grain of wheat or rice. No sugar, no milk, nothing. And in those places, we saw the granaries with millions of tons of grain in Rajasthan hit virtually by a famine during the drought-prone time. And it was on basis of that and some studies done by our colleagues that we went to the Supreme Court in 2001, saying that these are the studies on malnutrition, this is the findings in Rajasthan. We went there ourselves, we saw this ourselves. And I remember Chief Justice Kirpal was the Chief Justice then, and he wasn't a particularly human rights person. On the contrary, he was quite negative on human rights. And during my first few months in Delhi in the Supreme Court, I remember telling our friends, don't tell anybody that we're doing this case. So if it gets dismissed, there's not too much, gloom and doom around us. Keep it quiet till we know the results. And Justice Kirpal picked up the papers and he looked at me and he said, and I thought, oh God, what's going to happen? He looked at me and he said, this cannot be. Mr. Gonsalves, amend your petition, make it a petition for the whole country. Make it a petition for all the states. And Soli Soravji was the Attorney General then, On the next date of hearing, he ambled up to the court very confident. He's a lovely man, and he helped me much in my cases. He ambled up very confidently and he told the Chief Justice, Your Lordship, we agree with everything Mr. Gonsalves says. We agree with every single thing. There's so much malnutrition, so much poverty. It's so terrible, it's unbearable, it's unbelievable, etc., etc. But my Lord, we are a poor country. We don't have enough resources. And we'll try our best. And I give you an assurance that we'll do it. And I remember Justice Kirpal's response, 5 words. Cut the flab somewhere else. Cut the flab somewhere else. And then he tried to carry on. Soravji, the wind was taken out of his sails, so to speak. But he kept trying still. No, my Lord, we'll try. We'll give you an assurance and we'll give us some time. We'll turn things around and so on. And then he said, either you do it or we'll tell you how to do it. And it's true, isn't it? India is a country, 7% GDP. We are a world economic tiger. We are flushed with funds. But the funds go elsewhere. They're used wrongly. They're diverted to other purposes. They're diverted to banks, and those banks go, and industrialists take loans from these banks and then misuse the loans and get the loans again. We are flush with funds. This country has more than enough money for all its schemes and programs. And so he told him this, cut the flap somewhere else. Fast forwarding to today, 2016, one of the longest lasting public interest cases in the country. 350 million people benefited in terms of subsidized grain. I remember specifically in 2001, 2002, in Andhra Pradesh, the midday meal system was coming to an end. I remember because we had many friends from Andhra, and I came into very backward areas of Andhra and we did a study. The midday meal scheme, every person in a school would get a midday meal. That was coming to an end in 2001. It was coming to an end all across the country, but Andhra Pradesh was one of the worst. Now Telangana was one of the worst. The Anganwadi system was coming to an end. The feeding of children in Anganwadis and so on. Fast forwarding, Union of India and the state governments were forced to increase their budgets by something like 500%, 5 times the budget. If I was speaking in an American university, the professors would say, "Excuse me, Mr. Gonsalves, how can the court make an order that impacts budgets? Isn't that an executive function? We have something called the separation of powers, Mr. Gonsalves." I can answer very easily, actually. I don't want to bore you with that logic here. But the government was forced. Midday meal started right across the country. In Telangana, I must tell you, it's at 80% level. It's a miserable program, like all Indian programs are miserable, but it's operating at 80% of that miserable program level. I'm not happy, but anyway, according to the program, it's operating. The Anganwadi systems are back up and so on. So the right to food case. You might have heard about the AFSPA case, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, where in Manipur, Kashmir, and other places, the act creates a perception that the army has the right to kill on suspicion, which it does. The act does say that. If you suspect that somebody is a terrorist, you can shoot and kill. Just suspicion. That's enough. So a group of NGOs and so on got together and prepared a fact-finding report of Manipur of 1,540 persons extrajudicially executed in a period of 30 years. Can you imagine? Did you ever dream that in one tiny part of India, 1,540 young persons in their 20s were taken to the army barracks, tortured, and then taken to a forest and executed? Can you imagine that in democratic India such a thing can take place? How many of you say it's okay? If he's a suspected terrorist, it's okay. Anybody? How many of you say it's not okay, even if he is a suspected terrorist? Not okay. I'm sorry to ask this question in NALSA, because I went to Jindal once and I asked about death penalty. And you can pride yourself on being much better than Jindal. I went there and I was amazed and I said, young people. But of course that was because Justice Malimat had come before me and had spoken eloquently about the criminal justice system. And Malimat had some pretty terrible views on the criminal justice system. So he had, in a sense, biased everybody. So when I went there and I asked about the death penalty, and I had a whole range of hands going up, so I was very depressed. But I must congratulate you that you don't succumb to this theory that if somebody is suspected by the police of being a criminal in some ways, that the policeman can be judge and jury. Catch him, take him, decide I am suspicious about you, and kill that person. And for the first time, I must say, in 50 years, no court, no bench of the Supreme Court has ever had the courage, and I'm using the term courage with deliberation, no bench of the Supreme Court has ever had the guts to do what they ought to have done many years ago, namely, uniform does not give you immunity. Your stripes on your shoulders, on your epaulets, Your stars do not give you immunity. You break the law, you'll be punished like an ordinary person. Do we support our armed forces? Yes, we do. Do we support them when they strike against terror? Yes, we do. Are we opponents of terrorism? 100%, yes, we are. When the army fights a war and defends its people, are they defending us? Yes, we are. Are we indebted to them? We are. But if a person takes a suspected criminal, let's say, takes him to a barracks, tortures him, and kills him, you break the law. And in the AFSPA decision, how many of you have seen that decision? You must go, please. Take a little note of some of the things that I'm telling you, right? Look at the AFSPA decision of the Supreme Court. There is no immunity. You break the law, you'll be prosecuted like any other person. FIR will be lodged against you. In these 1540 cases, not one FIR. 30 years of killing, not a single first information report. An FIR will be lodged against you. You'll be subjected to interrogation by the police like any other person. So you may be, let's say, an army general. You kill somebody, you'll be taken to the police station, local FIR will be registered, your statement will be recorded, whatever. There'll be no immunity. And the fact that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act with its draconian provisions has lasted for upwards of 5 decades, said the Supreme Court, is a sign of military and executive negligence. That you run the country on the basis of such a draconian provision is unbelievable. So read that decision, my dear friends. Right? We never expected, because we have lost so many cases of extrajudicial encounters, we never expected that the bench of the Supreme Court would come down on the side of the people. And that's a question of strategy. Never give up. The Supreme Court is not like the Supreme Court of America or like the European Court. They all sit together. Our Supreme Court is 13 Supreme Courts, if you like. Everybody is sitting in benches of 2s and 3s. And every decision of a 2-judge bench or a 3-judge bench is a decision of the entire court. And decisions are given depending on the attitude and upbringing of a judge. You get a good bench and you can do miracles. You get a terrible bench and you just have to go away crying. But it's a bench of 13, it's 13 benches of the court. Had my AFSPA case gone before some other bench, maybe it would have been dismissed in a second. So it's a question of strategy, it's a question of never giving up. It's a question of doing a large number of public interest petitions in the hope that even if 50% get through, you can sail through and you can get wonderful orders to change and transform the world around you. How did we change Manipur? How did we change Manipur? Before the case, 300 executions a year. 300 to 500 executions a year. Then our case started. Then the court directed Justice Hegde committee, Justice Hegde was a Supreme Court judge, to look at 5 or 6 sample cases and decide. He took 5 cases, he investigated 5 cases, he went to Manipur. He looked at everything. He called the army officers, they were cross-examined by us. And he concluded that all 5 cases were fake encounter cases. He concluded that all the 5 dreaded terrorists, including a 12-year-old boy, Javed, who at 8 o'clock in the morning was reading to his grandmother in his house because his grandmother's eyes were weak. They barged into his room, caught him by the collar, took him to his garden, shot him dead in front of his family. That all these 5 so-called dreaded terrorists were not dreaded terrorists at all. He told the army, can you tell me what record shows you that 12-year-old Javed was a dreaded terrorist? You say, we have some secret information. That's it. In fact, the committee found that they had no criminal record at all. Forget being dreaded terrorists and so on. And what was the result? It went from 300 to 500 executions a year to about 3 last year. 3 the year before that, 3. It just stopped. The practice of killing people just stopped. So that was the change as far as AFSPA was concerned. Then you had a judge from Andhra Pradesh, Sudarshan Reddy, who was a member of the PUCL when he was a young man. And he was hearing the Chhattisgarh cases, where the vigilante group, the Salva Judum, had started. What's Salva Judum? Very simple. The army decides to give an automatic weapon to a 19-year-old, give you 3,000 rupees, gives you a policeman's badge, and covers you with the impunity of a policeman that you can't be prosecuted. 19-year-old. And many of these persons, criminal record. Let's say they were former whatever, militants, whatever. Some kind of criminal record. Can you imagine, I have an automatic weapon and I can strut around with my gun. And so you're given the license to rob chickens, you're given the license to rob utensils, you're given the license to raise villages to the ground, and you're given the license to rape and kill. So you go about the place raping, killing, you rob banks in some cases, you do all kinds of things. But in the process, you must guarantee that you will kill at least about 4 or 5 Naxalites. So you call them the Salva Judum. Came before Sudarshan Reddy and Justice Nijjar. So Justice Sudarshan Reddy asked, how many minutes do I have? 10 minutes. So Justice Sudarshan, I'm just enjoying myself, so I'm going beyond time. Justice Sudarshan Reddy asked very innocently, pretending to be very innocent, he says, so they have police, they have the status of a policeman? Yes, sir. They can't be prosecuted? Yes, sir. You give them training? Yes, sir. How many days training? 3 days training, sir. I see. And what do you cover in that? Constitutional law, criminal law, IPC, CRPC, this law, that law. He reeled off some 15 laws. I see. Okay. And how many of these were found engaging in crime? Then they gave some figure, some 500 of them were found engaging in crimes and so on. So he listened very carefully. And he listened to all their arguments. And I don't know if you've seen this judgment. Have you seen this judgment, Nandini Sundar? Professor, you're nodding. I want the rest of them to nod. Have you seen this judgment, Nandini Sundar? Please get onto your computers. It's so easy for you now. In my days, we never had computers. We didn't even have proper law books. I used to study out of Jabwala, which was this, I had pretty bad law education, let me tell you. I had to surmount all that. So you can, Nandini Sundar versus State of Chhattisgarh, one of the most brilliant judgments ever made by any constitutional court in the world. Ever. And what does it say? It understands the reality of India. It says that terrorists are not poor people fighting the state. If a tribal takes his bow and arrow out, or takes his javelin out, or takes his axe out, or a homemade revolver out and starts shooting at people trying to take his land, her forest, her waters, mining companies coming in, that's not terrorism. Terrorism is fomented by multinational corporations supported by the state coming into tribal areas and taking their lands forcibly. That, he said, is terrorism. Can you imagine a judge of the Supreme Court saying something as atrocious as that? And then he mentions the IMF, he mentions the World Bank that foments all this trouble, supports all these corporations in taking over people's... Can you imagine any court in any country speaking out against the great IMF and the World Bank and the corporations and their private militias and so on? And it was his background in PUCL, in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana. Because let me tell you, the center of human rights movement was Andhra Pradesh, Telangana. Was Telangana. The Andhra Pradesh Civil Liberties Movement, about which many of you have not heard a thing, I suppose, was the largest human rights movement in the country. Not an NGO, not foreign funded, not government funded. It was an NGO of hundreds and hundreds of lawyers and tens and thousands of people. When the Andhra Pradesh Civil Liberties Movement ever held a meeting in any part of Andhra Pradesh, there would be 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people gathering immediately to hear their leaders speak. It was a mass movement and it was a human rights movement. It was here in Telangana that it grew. It was here in Telangana that the state exterminated them one by one, one by one, one by one. Caught them, killed them, caught them, killed them, caught them, killed them. And it was here in the High Court that many judges turned away when these cases came, would not entertain cases against extrajudicial encounters. Sad story, sad history of Telangana and its judiciary. Some were very good, many were very bad. And what were they asking for? I remember Kannabaran calling me once because there was some talk of negotiations between the militants and they wanted to have a talk with the government. And so they were coming out of the jungles to have that talk, where the central government gave a sign to the forces, surround them and kill them as they come out of the jungles. So they were about to come out and Kannabaran told me, just call Shivraj Patil, who was then the Home Minister, and try and fix a meeting. We'll go and see him. So I called him and we fixed a meeting and we went to see him. And Kannabaran was so simple. He said, sir, this is to Shivraj Patil. He said, sir, what is our demand? Shivraj Patil, of course, would say, put down your arms, then we'll talk. It doesn't happen. Militants who are fighting for a cause don't put down their arms and then get killed. They talk, they negotiate, they settle, then they put down their arms. Look at the Irish rebellion and the British government. With arms in their hands, with the battle going on, they were negotiating. They negotiated, then they disarmed. You never say a stupid thing like this, put down your arms and then we'll talk. So anyway, he's telling him, so what are we asking for? What are the Naxalites in Andhra Pradesh asking for? Look, I'm no great supporter of Naxalism, I'm not saying that. So take me with a pinch of salt here. I'm in support of militancy, I'm very much a supporter of militancy of a particular kind. Anyway, so he said, we are asking that you implement your land reform laws. In the whole of the area, there are these zamindars who have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of acres of land, notwithstanding your ceiling laws. Your ceiling laws say above a particular ceiling, you have to surrender the land for distribution among the people. What are the militants doing? They're going and grabbing land and putting their red flag on it. And then they are terrorizing the landlord and the landlord is fighting with them and they're doing this and they're doing that. So we said, Mr. Shivraj Patil, announce a kind of a ceasefire and declare that you will genuinely, this is a list of our lands in Telangana. This is the list. Landlord's name, how much land he has, how much land he should have, how much land he should surrender. We are asking you one point demand. Please ensure surrender of that land. And we are giving you the list. And ceasefire while there's an independent committee going into distribution of land. And Shivraj Patil was looking at his watch while we were talking at him. Senior Kannabaran, wonderful man, taking time to drill sense into the head of that Home Minister, looking at his watch because Anil Ambani was in the next room. As we got out, we that he was waiting. And he said, after listening to him and opening his bag and closing his bag, he said, Kannabaran, ask them to lay down their arms and we will talk. So then I took Kanna, poor crestfallen Kanna, out of the room and I said, forget it, Kanna. These guys are not going to change. These guys are really not. So they went back and the armed struggle continued. So there was a genuine attempt, and many times there was a secretary here, Secretary Rural Development here, Shankaran. What a marvelous man, always trying to settle the struggle, identifying that the struggle was linked to land issues and economic issues and so on. Okay, so that was the Chhattisgarh case, and he ordered the dismantling of the Salva Judum. They had to dismantle the Salva Judum and do whatever law and order operations you have with your regular police and so on. Then we have the Singur case. And now I'll go rapid fire. Then we have the Singur case. You know Singur, right? Took the land, the Tatars took the land for a nano factory, etc. They took agricultural land, they took prime agricultural land, etc., etc., etc. What was the point of law? How many of you read the Singur judgment? Okay, just make a note. Gopal Gowda's Singur judgment, Justice Gopal Gowda. Singur judgment, 1 year back. When you acquire land for a company, it's different from acquiring land in public interest for the government. When you acquire land for the public, you have to go by a different route. You have to sit with the farmers, you have to discuss with the farmers, you have to negotiate rates, you have to negotiate alternative lands. If the farmers don't want to give you their land, they'll say go there, go here. But it's a more complicated route. What did Tatars do? And what did the CPM government do? They went in a helicopter, like the old Rajas who would go on elephant and say, I want this land, I want that land. They went by helicopter. And then the Tatars said, I want this land, I want that land, this looks good, that looks good. They came down, decided, gave the land. Single point argument from our side. It's acquisition for a company. It's not acquisition for the government, for God's sake. Acquisition for a company, you have to sit with the farmers and negotiate. And we succeeded. Gopal Gowda's wonderful judgment on land acquisition. If any of you want to catch up to speed on land acquisition law, please look at that judgment. Okay? In one judgment, you'll understand the parameters and the intricacies of land acquisition law. Then Jija Ghosh's case. Again, a young activist who was cerebral palsy. You'll walk in a slightly jerky fashion, and your speech is a little bit inaudible, but once you talk a bit, you can understand perfectly. International traveler, got a master's from Leeds University in the UK. Comes to India, gets on a SpiceJet flight. She's talking a little bit, so the air hostess thinks this is some alien from Mars or something. Gets her off the plane, knocks her off the plane, without even asking the pilot, just knocks her off the plane. She's traveled right across the world. Eminent person, bumped off. Jija Ghosh's judgment you must read, judgment of Justice Sikri on disability rights. And the order which transforms the way disabled persons are dealt with at airports. It's limited to airports, but an important judgment. If you have an artificial leg, women wearing jeans and an artificial leg, they'll take it off. So you have to take off your jeans, take off your thing, put it on again. And it's not easy taking off calipers and so on, not easy at all. If you're on a wheelchair, you have to get up and stand up. You're a wheelchair, for God's sake, because you can't walk. And they'll say, no, sir, you have to stand up. So then they'll, etc., etc. So basically the indignity in the treatment of people with disability, Jija Ghosh's case. I'm giving you just 2016. I'm giving you a flavor of just some of the judgments that we won in the year 2016. So you can imagine what it is, for the last many, many years. Then we have the death sentence cases. Coming before Justice Satashivam, this is a bit old. 16, including Veerapan and his gang, including Rajiv Gandhi assassination case people, Pararivalan and that whole group of people, including the Buller bomb assassination attempt. They had made applications for mercy to the President. President sat on those applications for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. Question is, keeping a person under sentence of death without determining the mercy petitions, without deciding the mercy petitions, is cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment akin to torture, and hence you are liable to have your sentence commuted from death to life. Okay? So they were in 16 death sentence persons. In the evening we get a call from jail in UP saying that, sir, we are going to be hanged tomorrow. How do you know? From our jail cell we can see the gallows being cleaned. How do you know? They've given us a fresh set of clothes. And how do you know? They've asked us if they want to have chicken tonight. So we know. These are the preparations for a death sentence. 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock we get the information, we rush to the registry, we draft the petition, it is ready at 10 o'clock at night, 10:30 at night. We rush to the Chief Justice's house, he keeps us waiting outside in the rain. He calls us in at about 11:30, 12, Justice Satashivam. I'm just giving you an insider thing into this. With a broad smile on his face. And my heart's going thump, 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 16 people, death row and so on. And he's smiling at me, I said, okay. So he says, okay, come, Colin, sit. Why have you brought your books? So we came ready for an argument and so on. He was a very wonderful Chief Justice, a very wonderful human being in many ways. And so he said, please sit. So we sat. And then he said, why did you bring your books? Just keep them aside. Just tell me, how long did the President sit over their mercy petitions? And we said, sir, 5 to 15 years. All right, please sit, please sit. Then he did small talk. Not like chatting like you have guests, you chat and so on. And then he calls a steno and orders stay. Not only does he order stay, he tells his staff, please stay here tonight, call all the jail superintendents of all these jails. Because I don't want anyone accidentally hanged because the stay order was not communicated to them. And you must see the judgment of Satashivam, the final judgment, Shatrughan Chauhan. Please make a note of that. Look at that judgment. Satashivam, I think 4 years ago. Shatrughan 5 years ago maybe. Shatrughan Chauhan's case. Commuting death to life. The sexual harassment case in Sikkim, where a young activist lawyer came to our office and said, in Sikkim there are a number of cases of sexual harassment of women in the hotel industry. A lot of tourists come there, the men are harassing them. There's not a single sexual harassment committee. One lawyer from Sikkim, one case, coming directly before the court, the judge simply asked, State of Sikkim, do you have a single sexual harassment committee? No, sir. When was Vishaka? 1990 something. And from all these years, you have not a single sexual harassment committee in any of the government departments? No, sir. And the order came for the... And I can go on, but I'll stop here. And I just want to summarize. It's a very powerful weapon. You go out into the world around you, you'll get 1 million cases. Out of the cases that come to you, half of them will be paying cases, the rest will be free. Of the paying cases that come to you, let me tell you, you will make a decent living. You will not starve, you will not, be rendered homeless or anything of the sort. Normal lawyers have very few clients. Normal lawyers, in the corporate sector, they'll have corporate clients, but in physical numbers, they have very few clients. You take up tribal cases, you take up Dalit cases, you take up women's cases. If you set up a small partnership firm and you're known for taking up women's cases, let's say, land acquisition cases, hundreds of cases will come to you. Because there is nobody in the country willing to take up cases of the middle class and the poor. There's just nobody. You go to any lawyer in Delhi and he'll say, yes sir, before you talk to me, you have to pay 50,000 rupees for a conference. For a conference. They get amazed when they come to my office and chat with me like I'm their old friend and waste my time and I don't charge any money. They get very amazed. But to just talk to a lawyer in Delhi, you'll end up paying 25,000, 50,000 rupees. There are millions of people suffering injustice, seeking solutions, looking for lawyers. You set up a young office anywhere in this country, and we'll train you to be accessible to people. We'll train you to go out to people. You sit behind a table as a human rights lawyer and expect people to come to you. It's not going to happen. You go out to people, go out to people, go out to people, go out to people, and they will flood your office after that. If you remain true to your cause, talk to them properly, deal with them politely, charge them reasonably, you'll have hundreds of clients. So that's a very specialized area of work. It's the majority area of work. It's the mainstream of work. And you must know how to harvest your clients, in a sense. How to identify the issue, how to go out to them, how to help them. And then, as a consequence of that, also to lead a decent life. You can set up your own offices and lead a decent life as a lawyer. And the greatest benefit of this all, apart from anything else, is when you go to sleep at night when you're in your 60s or 70s or whatever, you go to sleep with great peace of mind. You'll go to sleep with great calmness. Because all your life you have brought such happiness to people who otherwise would never have got into court. Never. But for the fact that you kept your doors open, and like Bala Gopal, you went out to them. There's a dam being built, compensation not being paid. Bala Gopal went out to them and opened the doors of the courts for them so that they could come into the court and get justice. And at the end of the day, you will remember all the smiles on the faces of people who were so desperate and helpless. It will give you great spiritual happiness and calmness. And that is the greatest satisfaction in any profession that you can ever have. Thank you, my friends.
Yeah. So maybe we have a mic there as well. Okay, so we can take questions for a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes on the higher side, since sir also has a flight. So whoever would like to ask a question or offer a short comment, you can raise your hand and speak from the mic. Okay, so in the final row first.
Hello, sir. Sir, you said that in disputed areas such as Kashmir or Northeast, the army have done many human rights violations, but the performance of the courts has been very lackluster. Even in many cases where there was concrete evidence to show that the armed forces were responsible for human rights violations, the courts have not taken a very clear and stand on that. So what do you think has been the reason for this?
You mean the lower courts in that state, or are you talking about public interest litigation?
As the court and
Let's say there's been a policy in the transfer of judges to put chief justices in these courts who are a little bit conservative and pro-status quo. So in the conflict states, you will generally find chief justices presiding who are not inclined to take up cases of atrocities by the security forces. That has been a policy for a very long time, and there have been studies done of Kashmir, Punjab, Andhra Pradesh. There have been studies done of how the courts have treated these cases. And it's a terrible, terrible injustice, because had the court stood firm, had the court said this is a case of fake encounter, I'm going to punish, I'm going to prosecute, discipline would have been set into the police force. We're not against the police force, we're not against the army, we're not against paramilitary forces. We want them to operate with discipline in accordance with the Constitution. Do what your duty allows, do not do what they do. So because of the failure of the judiciary, indiscipline continued. And it had a very powerful disruption in democratic functioning. So the high courts, and I must say the Supreme Court as well, was responsible for the fact that this disruption in law and order magnified. Because in the perception of people, there is no one to control them, not even the courts, not even judges. So judges who thought that they were supporting the state were actually doing something against the interests of the state in a broader sense. And the army people criticized me in meetings on AFSPA. Many army people stand up and speak. I said, sir, it's good for your army. Today, if they are brought under the rule of law, your army will be a disciplined force. Look in the long term, sir, don't look in the short term. So that's what happened. Sad but true.
Thank you, sir, for the talk. And this is Satyendra from fourth year. Sir,
from?
Fourth year.
होते हैं.
So, sir, two questions. One is when you say that students can easily go and appear in the courts, but so this is something which I saw in courts. It was income tax code, and this is what I have heard, like very much corruption is rampant in those courts. Even Justice Dave in his that ceremony in Supreme farewell ceremony, he mentioned this, because he was initially a CA, and when he was practicing in his initial days, so he left and then he joined High Court. So few on those lines also, sir. Second question is, many of or you can say people who are coming from those backgrounds or people who needs human rights lawyers, there are many more cases which should be addressed at the district level, district court level. So do you think, like, because as a student or someone who is not there, they cannot address those issues, because for I believe 80% people just believe that district courts are the Supreme Court for them, like they don't have enough money. And
let me answer your question quickly. Forget about corruption. Assume there is corruption. You can do nothing about it. You do your public interest petitions boldly and bravely and hope that it will come before a non-corrupt judge, no problem. Don't cripple yourself and don't make it an excuse that no, judiciary is corrupt, therefore I won't do. So as a young lawyer, I challenge you. You go to Telangana. In Telangana, there are thousands of cases ready, thousands of villages ready to do cases on all kinds of matters. Go, make a route for your case. Don't keep it flowing in the air. Make a route. Do your fact finding. Go to the High Court with your case and do it. Do it. And I'm telling you, if you tell the judge you're a second-year law student and you make a proper fourth-year law student and you make a proper petition based on facts, you will get an answer. If not here in the Supreme Court, you will get an answer from the court.
Hello sir, my name is Prakhar and I am from the first year. So basically when we talk about these ASPA, and there was this bill which was trying to be passed, Gujarat Control of Terrorism and Organized Crime bills and all these things. So the basic argument which people try making to support these kinds of bills and all that is utilitarianism, basically, that if we are controlling these just to save the lives of many other people, and because we are executing these suspected terrorists, we are, in exchange of that, we are saving many other lives of innocent people. So what is your response to this argument which is made every time?
I'll tell you what the human rights activist response is. Terrorism is an abhorrent crime. Terrorism is an evil in society. Has terrorism to be stamped out? The answer is yes. Should there be strong measures to stamp out terrorism? Yes. But should they operate within the boundary of constitutional law? The answer is yes. So the real crisis is this, that in the guise of stamping out terrorism, every human rights activist says, please have the laws. Please do it. Please prosecute. Please put them in jail for the rest of their lives. Right? The real crisis is that in the guise of fighting terrorism, right, you are trampling on many provisions for the protection of human rights. For example, I'll just give you one example and stop. In Tada, confession to a police officer admissible in evidence, which is not there in criminal law. And hundreds of cases, I've done maybe 10, 15 cases of Tada, you will have only the confession to hang on. And can you trust a confession to a police officer? You've seen Justice Ramaswamy's dissent in Kehar Singh's case. Kehar Singh, again, look at it please, Kehar Singh's case. It is abhorrent to have a provision that allows a person to go to the gallows based on a confession to a police officer. So, if anyone tells you that a human rights activist is for terrorism, is soft on terrorism, we are not. Please go ahead, please punish, please do everything that you have to do. But don't tinker with the constitutional protection so that you can take people whom you don't like and put them in as terrorists. That is not acceptable. Sir.
I asked this question several times. I had put it to Nandita also, who is an adjunct professor here. That what do you do with our students? You know, many of them are on education loans. And then in fourth year itself, corporates will come and recruit them, give them very lucrative offers. Now, if you and me ask them to do human right lawyering and seniors don't pay them well, how will they pay their education loan? So Nandita, I said, Nandita, you had good fortunes left by your father, so you can do that kind of work, and you are a fighter. But many of them are not fighters. How do I convince them that they leave this corporate offer through which they can pay off their education loan and do this kind of business, this kind of lawyering where they have to struggle? Because human rights lawyers will not be, you know, even senior lawyers who are making big fortunes are very stingy when it comes to make payments to juniors. But human rights lawyers are not having that kind of money. So how do we resolve this thing?
It's not easy to resolve. I don't have an easy answer, but there is an answer. I gave you my example because I came from a lower middle class family. We never had a car. We never had, you know, television set and things like that. So we were a lower middle class family. I don't try and convince anyone to do human rights law. Because I believe, one, that there is a self-evident test. And what is that test? When you see injustice, do you feel a sense of anger in your gut? Do you feel really ready to lose it, you know, anger? How did they treat the woman like this? How did they treat the slum dweller like this? How did they beat the child like this? Do you feel anger? If you feel anger, then you can say, and I'm giving you a test right now for all of you. If you don't feel the anger, you can safely go to corporate law. I can tell you that. No problem at all. You can't learn it from education. You can learn it a bit from education. From your professors, from your friends. But if you don't feel that anger, which I feel even today, at my age, I feel deep anger when I see injustice. I feel really want to go and catch the person. If you don't feel that anger, even the little churnings of anger, then maybe you are not cut out for human rights law. But there's a caveat to this. I never felt any anger. I was a good law-abiding Christian. I went to church regularly. I listened to my mama, I listened to my papa, I did everything that they said. I would have married a good Christian girl and I would have lived a normal Christian life with a job in a multinational company. 100%. Anger doesn't come. Anger comes when you go out into the world. Anger comes when you go out into the world. You must, when you're young, go out into the world of India. Wonderful country. Go to Telangana itself first. Go to Chhattisgarh where our friends are working. Go to the places in the country. Everywhere is wonderful human rights organizations, social workers working. The tribal areas, on environmental issues. Anger grows. If there's potential inside, and I believe there's potential in the soul of everybody, anger grows. So what is my advice to you? It's a very circular answer. I think I'm avoiding Dr. Mustafa's question in some way. One is you must now, you've lived a bubble all your life with your families. Now you're a little outside your family bubble, but you're in the NALSAR bubble. Go out into the world around you. And see if, when you see things and you realize you've got a law degree, for God's sake, you're getting a law degree. I can do so much for these people. Does it make you feel excited and angry? And then when you come out into the world, we can train you. If you're ready, even before you get a law degree, we can train you in certain areas so that you get clients. You rely on your senior to give you some money, you rely on your NGO to give you some money, and then we'll train you how to deliver, how to generate clients in different areas of law. If you're doing environment, you'll get so many groups coming to you. So like I said, I don't have a ready-made answer, but there is a scope for persons to earn reasonable. And when you start, your colleagues will go up into the, how much is it? 60,000 a month, 1 lakh a month. Somebody told me in terms of pounds a month, you know, and all that. I don't earn that even now, okay? So if you compare yourself to them and so on, no, you have to be yourself as your own standard. Don't imitate the world of mediocre people. Don't imitate them at all. Set your own standard, set your own levels, chart your own course. And we can show you, even if you start now, we can introduce you to the world of clients, so to speak. If you look at it in that narrow way, the world of clients. People who want your help, start today. Do PILs today. As a NALSAR student, do PILs today in your High Court and Supreme Court. We'll guide you, we'll help you draft the final PIL, and we'll tell you how to present. I'm okay, lunch is not so important.
Hello? Yeah.
I'm okay, so even if lunch gets cut off, it's okay. Then.
So you kind of touched upon it, but yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of touched upon it that in a way how judiciary is going out of its bounds to give orders, as in the judicial activism that we talked about. And you said that you have a very wonderful answer. This is one thing that has haunted a lot of people in this room as to if in case we go into PILs and all, the orders that are delivered from the courts are in a sense extension of power of judiciary, which is opposing the separation of powers principle. So you said that you have a wonderful answer, but you'll not spend time here giving that answer. But if in case you could throw some light upon it, how do we justify judiciary giving executive orders?
Yeah, there were 2 or 3 things. See, it's actually very simple. Let me give you a quick answer because we're running out of time. The duty of the court is to uphold constitutional values. The duty of the executive is to uphold constitutional values. Economic rights like the right to food, right to healthcare, and political rights against torture and so on. What happens when governance breaks down? What happens when constitutional values are not protected by a government? One step further, what happens when the government itself violates constitutional rights? Are the courts supposed to sit still and say, hey, that's an executive function? Feeding the poor, right to food, not my job. Giving you cheap medicines, not my job. It's an executive function. So that's the sterile world of Western jurisprudence. What do the courts say here? We wait for you. We give you the first chance. We warn you when a case comes up that, hey, you've got to provide people with healthcare services and so on. We remind you, you still don't do it. You show adamance. You show unconcern. You show disdain for constitutional values. Then we'll step in, we'll pass orders, and we'll tell you step by step what you should do. Now don't complain, because we deferred to you. We said you are the first person to implement fundamental rights. You chose not to do so, so we act. That action is called a transgression of the separation of powers. Not at all. It's a precise effectiveness, precise application of the separation of law principles. And the higher public good, namely, that all institutions are made to execute fundamental rights. The court will not abstain. Simple. Simple. You don't have the breakdown of governance in Europe like you have here. You don't have that. So for them, it's easy for them to understand what separation of powers means. What do you do in a country like India with these ministers and politicians? What do you do? With the government being the principal enemy of the people, what do? You must step in.
Fine. We can take the next question. It's anyway a theme that you will discuss in a lot more detail. I think much of the third year courses are actually just on this question.
Yeah, Yeah, you can shout out a lot, I can hear you.
Sir, thank you so much for the talk. I am an aspiring human rights lawyer, and I wanted to ask you, how would you go about building the confidence of these people from marginalized communities in the court system? And I'll give you the background for this question. So I was part of a team that surveyed the implementation of, or that was just surveying the disruptions that were caused due to Aadhaar being imbued in the PDS system. And we met a lot of single elderly women and a lot of disabled persons and other people who were excluded. And we were trying to collect affidavits from them about their exclusion cases, and this was to be filed before the Supreme Court. While these people were more than happy to share their struggles and sufferings with us, as soon as we mentioned courts, they would be extremely apprehensive and very reluctant to just voice their concerns, even if it was for an affidavit or simply giving, a statement. So if you were in such a position and dealing with such circumstances, how would you go about it?
See, generally I don't find reluctance unless it's not explained to them properly. They might feel that if they go to court, there'll be some repercussions on them, or they might feel that somebody's going to ask them for money, etc. Once they are put at ease that money is not being asked for, and the court will not, ask them for anything or ask them or punish them for going to court, generally, people in distress are looking for straws to clutch to. And a lawyer going out to the area will give them that straw, so to speak. Say you go to an area, there's fluoride poisoning in the water and people are bent over. They're like, their bones are, you do a case, situation is so desperate, they will welcome litigation. They will welcome some result. It depends on how you present it. It's not a simple court case, it's not simple litigation. You have to use different language, different terms, and different ways of explaining it to put people at ease. That you will try. You will not guarantee. You will not say that it will happen. But you have done cases, and some cases have worked, and you will try for them to get them fresh water or subsidized grain and so on. You understand, no? So there is not much of a reluctance. You might come across it in some cases, and it also depends on the way in which you handle it with them. And you don't really need to take affidavits from people. Wherever a person is apprehensive, never take an affidavit. Take it from the NGO or whatever. Sometimes people signing affidavits, it's like, hey, my signature on something. Get it? So you don't need to do that really. Unless you really worked with the people and they trust you implicitly. But to take a thumb impression of a person on a formal document is something you can avoid in a public interest case.
Sir, thank you very much for a very inspiring speech. My question was that how long does it on an average take for your cases to go through the entire process of the court and to get a judgment, and how do you deal with long pending cases? Like, any insight into that?
Okay. Like any craftsman, a lawyer is a craftsman. You may have a case because you're a bad craftsman, it could take a long time. You can have a case, if you're a good craftsman, take a short while. And you can have a cases, even though you're a good craftsman, it'll take a long while. So it's a mixture. Let me give you one example. Riots took place in Orissa. What was that place called? Where the riots took place? Kandhamal. Right? People were killed, houses were burnt. And then you had this political personality who was planning to come to the area and hold a Kalash Yatra. He would go through the villages where the certain community lived and he would burn. Their group would burn. Now quickly, Archbishop of Cuttack calls on Friday. Colin, this guy is going to come on Wednesday. It's been announced in the papers. If he comes, there will be murders again. Friday he calls. I say, Archbishop, come right away. He comes on a Saturday morning. Saturday, Sunday is the drafting. Monday morning at 10:30, our team is going to the registry, filing the case. Simultaneously, I mentioned before Chief Justice Balakrishnan. I said, sir, it's not yet filed. which is very rare. You can't mention if it's not yet filed, so it's just being filed. It's about the Kandhamal riots, and we want to stop Mr. X, let us say, from coming on Wednesday. Balkrishnan says, Justice Balkrishnan says, keep it at 2 o'clock, ask the Solicitor General to be present. Look at that, huh? 2 o'clock, the Solicitor General is there, the petition is brought before the judges. Solicitor General says, I want to take instructions tomorrow morning, 10:30. So now we are on Tuesday morning, and Wednesday, Tuesday morning, 10:30, arguments commence. For that person, a very senior gentleman appears who says that he should be allowed. Well, how can you stop him? To which I say that if he comes, there will be killings again. Right? Arguments, arguments, arguments. The court is in favor of stopping him, and he tells counsel, consult your client, or we pass orders. Either you voluntarily say that you are not going, or we'll... Tuesday afternoon, the matter is kept. Tuesday afternoon, the matter is settled, that no outsider will be allowed in those areas. One. Second is, our prayer is that the police are colluding with the rioters, and so they are not preventing them from attacking the villagers. Solicitor General takes instructions and tells the court, as we speak, the paramilitary forces are in the air and going to Kandhamal. So what was it? Friday evening phone call, Tuesday afternoon order. That's an exception to the rule. Some cases are much slower. But it can be pretty fast, depending on how you work the legal system.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Rohan here from Calcutta. So this question is not more because you're a lawyer, but because you claim to have worked with people who belong to oppressed sections and marginalized sections of the society. So when you spoke about the Singur case, or the case of the 16 people whom you saved from the death sentence, or whether we talk about, say, the Naga people's judgment, which came in the late 1990s, however, the implementation of it, even though they required the people from the AFSPA to be taken to the nearest magistrate close by, none of these were really ever implemented until and unless they came to the public limelight. And inadvertently we see that the implementation of this is dependent on people like you, people who claim to work for human rights works. So these people in this lower strata of society are inadvertently like over-dependent on people belonging to the relatively upper lanes of society for their support, and in themselves, no matter how cause or the system for which they claim to be working, they themselves are never able to go ahead with their objectives without the support of people like you and many other people who be working for human rights. So why do you believe is there such a disentanglement from actual human rights work and the judiciary and the justice, and how, since you've already these people for a long period of time, how do you propose these people go ahead and get their problems out in the limelight, given that there's an inherent contradiction, as you yourself mentioned, in the media, which is more often than not claimed by these corporate houses?
Understood.
Yeah. Small clarification, the AFSPA order, I think the reference was to the 2016 case, not the Naga Hill judgment from 98, the EEVFAM judgment from July.
Yeah. Right? See, it would appear that educated persons are helping working class and poor people. And it sometimes seems as if without educated people, they would be in a mess. The truth is exactly to the contrary. Educated people are often very unreliable, very inconsistent, and very prone to compromise. But if you look at the struggles, let's say, of the tribal people in Andhra, Telangana, Jharkhand, Orissa, West Bengal, it's not led by articulate, educated people at all. The real change in this country and the real struggles are the struggles of the tribals themselves. Do they get help from outside? Very little. Are they internally organized? Yes, they are, very strongly organized. Do they put their lives on the line? Do they get killed in the battle for, resources and so on? Yes, they do. So it might appear at times that, people like I, and we play a very insignificant role really Today we are in a law college talking about law judgments, etc. But if you expand the contours of your thinking to the whole of the country, you'll realize that educated people play a very small role, very critical role at times, I agree, but a very small role. Take Singur. The case languished for, the question that you asked, the case languished for 10 years, 12 years maybe. Did they bother? They didn't bother. Supreme Court didn't give them justice, they didn't bother. High Court held against them, they didn't bother. They carried on their agitation, they knocked off the Tatars. They took over, virtually ready to take over land. Supreme Court judgment came at the end saying, give back the land. Right? But it is they who won the struggle, not the lawyers who handled the case. It's not our contribution really. We bask in the glory of working class people doing struggle. That is the real engine of change in this country. And young middle class people have to learn to be with that. Be part of that glory, that history in the making.
Certainly there will be plenty of opportunity to speak about the politics of representation. I believe you're still in the second year, right? So plenty of time to discuss that. So in the interest of time, we bring the session to a close. And I'd like to thank Dr. Gonsalves for a very frank and informal talk, which was actually talking about orders which we would otherwise read on the screen or in the reporters. But he was almost giving us a very conversational discussion on some of these recent orders. So we hope to host you again, and hopefully we'll plan some more substantive discussion on some of the cases that you worked upon, sir. And once again, thank you all for coming on Republic Day. And I think we can agree that this is a very suitable. And given that the Nyaya Forum was pitching it as a Republic Day talk, I think the content is also quite suited for Republic Day, right?